There are certain moments in life that split everything into before and after. For me, that moment was a Tuesday afternoon in March. Standing in the driveway of my in-laws' house in Naperville, Illinois, watching my sister-in-law scream into her phone while my husband stood 6 feet away from me and said absolutely nothing. I had just told them I was pregnant. I want to back up, because if I start there, you won't understand how we got to that driveway, and you won't understand why what happened next nearly destroyed me, and why, 3 years later, I am sitting in my own home, my daughter's asleep in the next room, feeling something I honestly never expected to feel again. Peace. My name is Vera. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed CPA and I run a small but steady accounting practice out of the suburbs of Chicago. I have a daughter named Poppy who is 2.5 and currently obsessed with the moon, specifically the question of whether the moon has a bathroom. I have a dog named Biscuit who eats socks. I have a mortgage I am paying off on my own, a savings account that would have impressed the version of me who was 25 and completely terrified of the future, and a life that is genuinely, authentically mine. I did not always have any of this. 4 years ago, I was a different version of myself, not unrecognizable but quieter, more careful. I had learned very young that making yourself small was a form of self-protection, and I had carried that lesson into my marriage like a piece of furniture I didn't notice anymore because I had walked around it so many times. I was married to a man named Derek. We had met in our late 20s at a work conference in Indianapolis. He was charming and tall and laughed at everything I said, and at the time I had confused that for intimacy. I know better now. Derek's family was from old Midwestern money. Not obscene wealth, but the comfortable, settled kind that gets embedded in a family's identity over generations. The kind where certain neighborhoods and certain country clubs and certain last names carry a specific social weight that everybody pretends isn't there but everyone can feel. His mother, my mother-in-law, had inherited a portion of her own mother's estate, which included a trust worth approximately $800,000 that would transfer to Derek upon his mother's death or her decision to release it, whichever came first. His mother had made it extremely clear, in the way that people who never say anything directly make things extremely clear, that she intended to be the one who decided when and whether that money moved. Her name was Loretta. I want to be precise about Loretta because it matters. She was not a cartoonish villain. She did not twirl a metaphorical mustache. She was a well-dressed woman in her late 60s who volunteered at her church, made excellent pie, and had spent 40 years being the most important person in every room she entered. She was the kind of person who said things like, "I just want what's best for everyone," while doing things that were specifically, calculatedly, best for no one but herself. She had raised Derek to believe that her judgment was infallible, that her instincts about people were always right, and that her approval was the highest form of currency. He had never questioned any of this. Not once. Not even when he probably should have. When Derek and I started dating, Loretta was polite to me in the way that someone is polite to a hotel employee, perfectly pleasant on the surface, and utterly indifferent to my actual humanity underneath. I told myself I was imagining it. Derek told me I was imagining it. I am a trained financial professional. I am good at reading numbers, which means I am also good at reading patterns. I was not imagining it. We got married in October, a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of Geneva, Illinois. It was beautiful. I was happy. Loretta wore a shade of cream that was extremely close to white, and when I mentioned it to Derek later that night, he said I was being oversensitive. I was not being oversensitive. The first year of our marriage was fine. The second year was harder. Loretta called Derek every single day, sometimes twice. She had opinions about where we lived, what car we drove, when we would have children, and whether my method of organizing the pantry was efficient. Derek shared her opinions with me as if they were just things that had occurred to him personally. I learned to recognize the difference between what Derek actually thought and what Loretta had told him to think. The gap between those two things was, honestly, not very large. In January of our 3rd year of marriage, I got pregnant. I want to tell you what that felt like because I think it matters. I was in the bathroom of our house in Evanston at 6 in the morning. It was dark outside. The test was positive. I sat down on the cold tile floor and I cried, not because I was scared, but because I was genuinely, overwhelmingly happy in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I had wanted this. I had wanted this so much that I hadn't let myself say it out loud because wanting things out loud had started to feel dangerous. I walked into the bedroom and woke Derek up. His face when I told him, that first unguarded second, was pure joy. I want to hold on to that, because it was real, and it was the last moment of that particular kind of realness for a very long time. By that afternoon, he had called his mother. Loretta's reaction, as Derek reported it to me, was cautious. She wanted to make sure we were financially stable enough for a baby. This from a woman who had never once asked about my career, my income, or my financial planning, which, as a CPA, I had done more carefully than probably anyone in her social circle. I let it go. I was 11 weeks pregnant, and I was choosing my battles. 2 weeks later, Derek suggested we go to his parents' house in Naperville for Sunday dinner to share the news in person. His sister, my sister-in-law, a woman named Kira who was 2 years younger than Derek, and had her mother's smile and her mother's talent for making you feel like you were always slightly disappointing, would be there too. I agreed. I brought flowers. I made a dessert. I was trying. Dinner was fine. It was fine the way that dinners in that house were always fine. Surface conversation, careful jokes, everybody performing a version of warmth that didn't quite reach their eyes. After dessert, Derek squeezed my hand under the table and I nodded. We told them. Loretta's face did something I still cannot fully describe. It moved through several emotions very quickly. Surprise, then calculation, then something that settled into a tight, controlled smile. How wonderful, she said. Kira got up to refill her glass of wine. Derek's father, a quiet man named Gerald, who I had always suspected was simply waiting out his retirement years in the most peaceful way possible, said congratulations and looked genuinely pleased. Loretta asked when I was due. I said September. She said she hoped I was taking care of myself. I said I was. She said pregnancy could be very hard on women who worked long hours. I said I was managing fine. She said, "Of course you are," in a tone that meant the opposite. We drove home. Told myself it had gone well. I was practicing at that point a kind of aggressive optimism that I now recognize as a coping mechanism. Things were fine. Everything was fine. The baby was healthy. I was healthy. This was good news, and we were happy. 3 days later, Derek came home from a lunch with his mother, and he was different, quieter, careful in a way that made my stomach drop immediately because I knew that particular kind of careful. I asked him how lunch was. He said fine. I asked what they talked about. He said nothing much. We ate dinner and watched television and went to bed, and the next morning he told me that his mother had some concerns. His mother's concerns, as he laid them out, were as follows: that the pregnancy had happened very quickly, that we had not discussed it with the family first. Apparently, notification should have preceded conception, and that his mother had questions about the timing relative to a conversation she claimed Derek and I had had about taking a break. We had never had that conversation. I said so. Derek said he was just telling me what she said. I asked what he had said in response. He looked at the kitchen table. I had my answer. Over the following 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I kept trying to talk myself out of. Loretta called Derek constantly. I could hear his voice change when he answered. Short, clipped. The voice he used when he was receiving instructions. She started making comments, passed through Derek like a game of telephone, suggesting that I was stressed and high-strung and maybe not ready. I was a 30-year-old married woman who had planned this pregnancy and had a fully funded emergency account and a thriving client list and a baby that was growing healthy and on schedule. I was not high-strung. I was being managed. The camera I installed in the front hallway was something Derek never knew about. I had bought it 6 weeks into the pregnancy after the third time Loretta had let herself into our house while I was at work. She had a key, a fact I was apparently supposed to be grateful for, and rearranged things. Once it was the nursery closet. Once it was the pantry. Once she had gone through the filing cabinet in the office, and I only knew because she had refilled one of Derek's old tax documents in the wrong year, and I noticed. A small camera, the size of a smoke detector, recording to a cloud account only I could access. I want you to know that I am not a paranoid person. I am a person who had started to understand what was actually happening inside my own home. In early April, at about 15 weeks along, I had a routine checkup, and my OB mentioned that my blood pressure had been trending upward. Not dangerous, but worth monitoring. She asked if I was under stress. I said things were fine. She looked at me the way that people look at you when they can tell you are lying, but it is not their place to push. She said I should rest when I could. The following Saturday, Loretta called and asked if we could come over. She had made Derek's favorite roast. I did not want to go. I told Derek I wasn't feeling great, which was true. He said it would only be a few hours, and his mother really wanted to see us, and it would mean a lot, and we hadn't been over since telling them the news and couldn't I just this once. I went. I know. Dinner was different that night. Loretta was warmer than usual, which, if I had been thinking more clearly, I would have recognized as a sign. She asked about the baby. She asked about names. She touched my hand at one point across the table and said she was sorry if she'd seemed distant, and she was just processing the news and she wanted to be supportive. I felt myself relax in a way that I hate to admit now. After dinner, she brought it to me specifically. She said the blend was good for digestion, that she'd been drinking it throughout both her pregnancies. I drank the tea. By the time we got home, I was not feeling right. Not dramatically wrong, not in a way I could name at first, just off. Like the floor was slightly uneven under my feet. I drank water. I sat down. By 9 o'clock, I was in real pain, cramping in a way that was not normal, and I knew it immediately because I had been paying very close attention to every single thing my body did for 15 weeks. Derek drove me to the ER. I called my OB from the car. At the hospital, they did blood work. They did an ultrasound. The baby was okay. That is the sentence I held on to while everything else was happening. The baby was okay. The baby was okay. The baby was okay. But I was not okay. The blood work flagged abnormal levels of a compound that should not have been in my system. The ear doctor asked me, very calmly, whether I had taken any supplements or herbal remedies. I said only what my OB had prescribed. He asked if I had eaten anything unusual. I said I'd had dinner at my in-laws. He asked who had prepared the food. I looked at Derek when I answered. Derek's face had gone completely blank. The blankness of someone who is hearing something and refusing to let themselves understand it. The hospital admitted me overnight for monitoring. The baby remained stable. My blood pressure had spiked and then gradually came down. A nurse told me, matter-of-factly and without drama, that whatever I had ingested had been processed well enough that there was likely no lasting harm, but that it was a very good thing I had come in when I did. I did not sleep. Derek sat in the chair beside my bed and did not say very much. At one point, he said that there had to be an explanation. I asked what explanation he had in mind. He said he didn't know. I said I didn't either, but I knew what the blood work showed and I knew who had given me the tea. He said his mother would never. I said the blood work did not care what his mother would never do. He said I was upset and not thinking clearly. I said that was interesting, given that I was the one with a biochemistry anomaly in my blood work. He looked at the wall. We did not speak for the rest of the night. In the morning, before I was discharged, 2 things happened. The first was that a detective came to take a statement. The hospital had flagged the blood work and made a report, which is standard in cases that suggest possible intentional ingestion. I told him everything. I told him about the tea. I told him about the camera in my hallway, which had footage of Loretta entering our home 4 days earlier while I was at work, footage I had not yet reviewed of that specific visit. The detective wrote everything down. He was very methodical, which I appreciated. The second thing that happened was that Loretta and Kira arrived at the hospital. I still do not know how they got up to my room. HIPAA regulations exist for a reason, and nobody in that hallway should have allowed them past the nurse's station, and I intend to file a complaint about that. But at the time I was lying in a hospital bed at 30 weeks pregnant. 15 weeks, though it felt like a lifetime. And suddenly Loretta was in the doorway with her coat still on and her purse over her arm and an expression on her face that was the single most precise mask I have ever seen a human being wear. She said she had heard I wasn't feeling well, and she wanted to make sure everything was all right. Kira, behind her, said she'd called Derek and he'd mentioned I was in the hospital and they'd come right over. I looked at Derek. Derek looked at the floor. I said very quietly that I needed them to leave. Loretta's expression shifted, just slightly, into something that looked like hurt feelings, and she said she was only there to help. I said I had made a report to the hospital and a detective had taken my statement. The mask slipped then. Not completely, she was very controlled, but enough. Her eyes went to Derek and she said something about how this was all a misunderstanding and hormones and stress can make people irrational. Kira said the baby probably wasn't even Derek's anyway. She said it the way you might say it if you had been waiting to say it. Like it had been sitting there, ready, and this was finally the moment. The detective, who was still in the hallway completing his notes, heard it. I did not respond. I had learned, somewhere in the past 4 months, that the most powerful thing I could do in any given moment was to not react in the way people who wanted to hurt me expected me to react. I looked at Loretta. I looked at Kira. I looked at Derek, who was still looking at the floor. I said, I need everyone who is not a medical professional to leave my room right now. The nurse who came in at that moment was a woman named something I don't remember, and she was absolute. professional immovable. She asked everyone who was not immediate family, clarifying that in this case that meant the patient's spouse, and only the patient's spouse, to step out immediately or she would be calling security. Loretta looked like she had been handed something extremely distasteful. She left. Kira left, though not quietly. Derek stayed. He looked at the floor. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything for a very long time. Finally, I said, "When this is over and the baby is home safe, I am going to need you to tell me where you stand. Not where your mother stands. Not what your mother told you. Where you stand." He said he stood with me. I did not believe him, but I filed the information away. Here is what the camera in the hallway showed. Loretta, 4 days before my hospitalization, entering our house using the key Derek had given her 3 years ago. Moving through the front hallway, going into the kitchen, spending 11 minutes in the kitchen, leaving. I handed this footage to the detective the following morning, transferred from my cloud account to a flash drive that I had asked my best friend, a woman named Audra, who drove an hour to the hospital the night I was admitted and slept in the waiting room, to bring me from my home office. The detective thanked me. He said someone would be in touch. The following weeks were the strangest of my life. I was home, monitored, on modified bed rest. Derek was present physically and absent in every other way. He answered his mother's calls in another room. He stopped sharing what they talked about. I understood that he was somewhere in the middle of 2 gravitational pulls and lacked the spine to choose one deliberately. So instead, he was being pulled slowly apart, and I was watching it happen with a clarity that surprised me. My OB said the baby was fine. She said it at every appointment with a firmness that I think was specifically for me, because she had seen the ER report. She did not ask me questions I couldn't answer. She just said, "The baby is fine." I held on to that. At 22 weeks, I started making calls. The first was to a family law attorney named, this is real, this is her name, Donna, who had been referred to me by 2 different people and had a reputation for being extremely good in complex cases involving inherited assets, contested financial agreements, and what she described on our first call in a very flat voice as families who believe money and control are interchangeable. She told me to document everything. I told her I had already been doing that for 6 weeks, she said. Good. The second call was to my firm's accountant, a practical man named Owen, who had handled my professional books for 3 years. I asked him to run a full analysis of our household finances. What was mine? What was Derek's? What was shared? What would be relevant in a separation? He had it to me in 4 days. It was clarifying in the way that financial documents are always clarifying. Numbers do not have emotions. They simply tell you what is true. The third call was to the detective, following up. He told me the investigation was ongoing. He told me I had done the right things. He told me not to discuss the case with Derek or his family. I said I hadn't been. He said he could tell. In June, when I was 26 weeks pregnant, Loretta was arrested. Derek called me from his parents' house, where he had apparently been when it happened. He was crying, which was the most emotion I had seen from him in 4 months. He said his mother hadn't done anything. He said I had destroyed the family. He said he didn't know how I could do this. I said I was going to be a mother. I was not going to apologize for protecting my child. He came home that night. He slept in the guest room. We did not speak much over the following 2 weeks, existing in the same house like 2 people who had both already left but hadn't moved out yet. My attorney had filed the paperwork. We were separating. He did not contest it. I think, and I have thought about this a lot, in the quiet hours when Poppy is asleep and the house is still and I am finally able to just think, I think Derek is not a bad person. I think he is a weak one. I think he was raised to give his mother's reality more weight than his own. And by the time I married him, that calculus was so deep in him it had become structural. He could not choose me because choosing me would have required him to question the entire architecture of who he had been told he was. He couldn't do it. He chose the path of least resistance, which in practice meant doing nothing while I was harmed, because doing nothing felt less like a choice than it was. I cannot carry his weakness for him. I have my own weight to carry. Poppy was born in September, 9 pounds and 2 ounces, completely healthy, with a full head of hair, and the most serious expression I have ever seen on a newborn. She looked at me like she was assessing me. Given everything I had been through in the preceding months, I found this extremely comforting. She was going to be fine. She was already auditing the room. Audra was in the delivery room with me. My mom flew in from Phoenix and stayed for 3 weeks. My house was full of people who loved me, and I realized in a kind of loose, floaty moment between one diaper change and the next, that this was what I had been building toward without knowing it. A life where the people inside my walls were safe, where nobody had a key who was going to use it against me. The divorce was finalized in February. Derek got very little. The house had been bought primarily with my income and the down payment from my own savings, which Donna had documented with meticulous precision. The trust. Loretta's trust, the $800,000 that had driven so much of what happened, became largely irrelevant because Loretta was facing federal charges for criminal poisoning of a pregnant woman, which in the state of Illinois carries serious consequences. And the trust had been flagged as part of a broader investigation into financial motivations underlying the assault. Derek, who was named as a potential beneficiary, had his own legal situation to navigate, which I will leave for him and his attorney to sort out. The case went to trial in spring of the following year. I testified. I sat on the stand in a courtroom in DuPage County, 7 months after Poppy was born, and I told the truth about every single thing that had happened in a clear, organized, and chronological manner, because I am a trained professional and presenting facts clearly is what I do. The footage from the hallway camera was admitted into evidence. The blood work was admitted into evidence. Loretta's attorney argued that the compound in my blood was a coincidence, and that the camera footage showed nothing more than a mother-in-law checking on her son's home. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Loretta was convicted. She was sentenced to 8 years in a state correctional facility. She will be eligible for parole in 5. I do not think about this often. I have made a decision not to invest my energy in what Loretta is doing or feeling, because Loretta took enough of my energy when she was in my life, and I am not going to allow her to continue taking it from the inside of a prison cell. Kura moved to Denver. I know this because a mutual acquaintance mentioned it in passing. I have no feelings about Denver. Derek is, as far as I know, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Naperville and working at his father's insurance company, which is what he was doing when I met him, and is apparently what he will continue doing indefinitely. His father sends Poppy a birthday card every year and a modest check that I deposit into her college savings account. Because Gerald is, at the end of everything, a decent man who was married to a very difficult woman for a very long time. I don't judge him. I don't have the energy for it, and frankly, having spent 3 years in close proximity to Loretta, I think I understand his survival strategy better than most. Derek has visitation, supervised quarterly. He calls sometimes on Poppy's birthday. She is 2.5. She does not yet have a fully formed understanding of who he is. When she does, I will answer her questions honestly and with as much compassion as I can manage for a person who sat in a chair by my hospital bed and chose silence. I want to be clear about one thing. I did not build the life I have now out of anger. I built it because I was sitting in a hospital bed at 15 weeks pregnant, my blood full of something someone had deliberately put there, and I made a decision. I was not going to let this be the story of what happened to me. I was going to let it be the story of what I did next. What I did next was work. I took on 3 new clients in the last trimester of my pregnancy, working modified hours from home. I took on 4 more in the months after Poppy was born, working during her nap times, slowly, steadily, the way you build anything real, not in one dramatic gesture, but in the accumulation of ordinary days. I hired my first employee 14 months after the divorce was finalized. I moved my practice into a dedicated office space in Wilmette 8 months after that. I own the suite. I have 6 employees. I specialize, with a deep personal investment in the subject, in financial fraud examination. I am good at finding what people try to hide. I am sitting at my kitchen table right now. It is a Tuesday evening and Poppy is in the other room talking to Biscuit about something that I can hear involves the word spaceship used repeatedly. The light is coming in sideways through the window the way it does in late afternoon in the Midwest. That particular slanted gold that I have always loved and forgot to love for a few years and have loved again fiercely ever since. I don't think about Loretta's cell or Derek's apartment or the hallway of that hospital. I don't think about the tea or the blood work or the sound of Kira's voice saying what she said. Those things happened. They are part of the architecture of everything that came after. But they are not the story I am living inside anymore. The story I am living inside has a child in it who wants to know if the moon has a bathroom. It has a dog who eats socks. It has a business I built from the ground up and a savings account that reflects the actual value of the work I have put into this life. It has early mornings and difficult clients and grocery runs, and Audra calling on Sunday evenings to debrief the week. It has all the ordinary texture of a real existence, and I want every single piece of it. People tell me sometimes that I must be so strong. I understand why they say it, but I want to be honest with you about something. I am not strong in the way people mean when they say that. I am not impervious. I cried in the parking lot of my OB's office more times than I can count. I called my mom at midnight 3 separate times in the first year after Poppy was born and just said, "I don't know how to do this," and she talked to me until I did. I was not fearless. I was terrified regularly. But I made a decision, in a hospital bed in March, to be terrified and continue anyway. And that is the only kind of strength I actually believe in. If you are listening to this and you are somewhere inside a version of what I went through, maybe not this exactly, maybe something quieter or slower or harder to name, but something that is shrinking you, I want to say this to you clearly. The life on the other side of that does not require you to be fearless. It only requires you to take the next step, and then the next one after that. It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to look like anything from the outside. It just has to be yours. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from a place you never expected to be? I want to hear from you in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe. We tell stories here about the kind of survival that happens quietly, in ordinary lives, one Tuesday at a time.